"I'm too big for you," Amish mail-order bride said. But the virgin mountain man said, "You're perfect." The autumn wind swept hard down the main street of Gunnison, carrying with it a chill that cut through coats and shawls. A stagecoach clattered to a stop in front of the general store, its wheels sinking into the muddy ruts. When the door creaked open, a young woman in plain Amish dress stepped down, clutching a small satchel. Her name was Abigail Troyer. She was tall, broad-shouldered, with hands roughened by years of farm work. Her cheeks flushed pink against the cold, but that did nothing to soften the cruel whispers that rippled through the gathered crowd. "Too big for any man," someone muttered. "Mail-order bride, more like mail-order mistake," another chuckled. Abigail's throat tightened. She had come with hope folded in her satchel alongside her few belongings, a promise written in neat script from a man who said he wanted a wife who believed in simplicity, honesty, and faith. Yet, as she scanned the faces in the crowd, searching, dread crept in. The man who had written her was nowhere to be seen. The jeers grew louder. Heat stung her eyes. She wished the earth would open beneath her shoes. And then a shadow moved through the crowd. Elijah Stone, Eli to the few who dared speak his name, was taller than most, his frame solid as the ridges behind the town. His beard was thick, his face scarred from a logging accident years back. People whispered he was a recluse, a mountain man who knew more about bears than he did about people. He stopped before Abigail. Silence spread, cutting the laughter short. His eyes, steady and unflinching, met hers. "You're perfect," he said, his voice low but carrying. The crowd gaped. Abigail's lips parted, stunned. In that single breath, the laughter died, replaced by an astonished hush. Abigail stood frozen on the muddy street, her satchel clutched so tightly the handle dug into her palm. The last thing she had expected was for anyone, least of all a stranger of Elijah Stone's stature, to speak words of kindness when the whole town was laughing at her. The people of Gunnison didn't know her story. They didn't know the long nights she'd spent bent over a lantern writing letters to a man who had promised companionship. They didn't know how carefully she had saved coins for the stagecoach fare, believing she would step into a new life far from the narrow judgments of her Amish kin in Pennsylvania. What they saw was a girl too big, too plain, too out of place. And Elijah Stone was hardly the kind of man who usually stepped forward to defend anyone. He was known on the fringes of town life, sometimes seen hauling pelts to the trading post or sharpening tools at the blacksmith's in exchange for venison. Most people crossed the street when he came near. His scars told stories no one dared ask about, and his awkward silence made even the boldest gossipers uneasy. It was said he'd lived alone in the mountains since his parents died in a fire years before. A virgin mountain man, some whispered, more comfortable with axes and rifles than with a woman's smile. Yet here he stood, looking at Abigail as though she were not a spectacle, but a person. The innkeeper, shifting uncomfortably, cleared his throat. "Mr. Stone, she's not the bride you expected, surely? I was told she came here on account of letters from some man in the East." Elijah's eyes never left Abigail. "I answered those letters," he said simply, "and I stand by them." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Abigail blinked, confused. "You? But you didn't describe yourself. I thought—" Her voice caught. "I thought you'd turn away when you saw me," Elijah admitted, his tone gruff. He gestured toward his scarred cheek, the stiff set of his shoulders. "But you wrote of honesty and a plain life. That's all I have to give." The crowd's smirks faltered. For the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, Abigail felt her shame loosen just enough for breath to enter her lungs. Still, doubt pressed against her ribs. Could this man truly mean what he said? Or was she only a convenient answer to his loneliness? Elijah, as though sensing her unease, stepped back and nodded toward the inn. "Come, you'll stay there tonight. I'll pay." Gasps rose from the onlookers. Few in Gunnison had ever seen Elijah spend coin for anyone but himself. But he pressed the money into the innkeeper's hand without hesitation, then turned to Abigail again. "You've traveled far," he said, his voice quieter now. "Eat, rest. Tomorrow we go up the mountain." The crowd slowly dispersed, robbed of its sport. Abigail remained rooted, her heart pounding. In one day, her hopes had shattered and reformed into something unexpected. The man who stood beside her was not the dream she had painted in her letters, nor the husband she had imagined. He was scarred, solitary, unreadable. Yet his words, "You're perfect," rang louder in her chest than all the jeers combined. She nodded faintly, and for the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, she allowed herself to believe she might not have been a fool for coming to Gunnison after all. The morning air bit sharp and clean as Abigail stepped from the inn with her satchel in hand. Frost silvered the wooden railings, and the sky stretched pale above the peaks. She had barely slept, her mind chasing circles of fear and fragile hope. Yet, when Elijah Stone appeared with his mule and wagon, she felt her shoulders ease. He did not speak much. With quiet efficiency, he loaded supplies, sacks of flour, a bundle of wool blankets, a coil of rope. When she hesitated, he took her satchel and set it in the wagon bed without comment, as though it weighed no more than a feather. Then he helped her onto the seat, his hand rough and steady against hers. The town watched them depart. Some smirked, some whispered, but Elijah seemed not to notice. He clicked to the mule, and the wagon rolled toward the rising mountains. The road narrowed quickly, turning from muddy ruts to stony paths lined with spruce and pine. Abigail clutched the edge of the bench, her stomach tight with nerves. Silence pressed between them, broken only by the creak of wheels and the mule's steady huffing. At midday, Elijah reined the mule near a stream. He filled a tin cup and handed it to her. "Drink." She obeyed, the water cold enough to sting her teeth. He tore a strip of jerky in half and passed it to her. For the first time in days, she ate without shame. As they traveled, she noticed how he moved with the land, pausing when the mule stumbled, scanning ridges for signs of weather. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words carried purpose. "See that tree?" he asked once, pointing toward a tall pine with bark stripped clean. "Elk pass through. You can tell by the marks." Later, he showed her how to find dry kindling beneath fallen logs, how to test berries before eating. His lessons were spare, almost reluctant, but she realized he was not dismissing her. He was preparing her. That night, they camped in a clearing where snow lingered in the shadows. Elijah built a fire and set a small pot of beans to warm. Abigail wrapped herself in the buffalo coat he offered, its weight both strange and comforting. She watched him from across the fire, the glow etching the lines of his face, softening the scars that had once frightened her. "Why did you answer my letters?" she asked, her voice trembling. He stirred the pot, the silence stretching so long she thought he would ignore her. Then he said, "Because you wrote plain, no airs, no pretense. I knew you were honest. I needed that." Abigail lowered her eyes, warmth spreading in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. For so long she had been told she was too big, too awkward, too much. Yet this man had chosen her for qualities she had thought invisible. The next day, the trail grew steeper. Abigail stumbled often, her skirt snagging on rocks, her breath burning. She expected him to scold, but Elijah only slowed his pace, offering a hand when the path narrowed. His touch was brief, practical, but it steadied her more than she cared to admit. By dusk, when the valley opened and she glimpsed smoke curling from a distant chimney, exhaustion mingled with something unexpected, anticipation. Ahead lay the cabin of a man she barely knew, in a wilderness she had never dreamed of braving. Yet, with every step, she felt the weight of her old life slipping further behind. The cabin revealed itself at the edge of a clearing, snug against the pines, its roof dark with weather, but sturdy. Smoke lifted from a stone chimney, carrying the scent of pine resin and stew. Abigail's breath caught. She had expected something rough, perhaps little more than a hut, but this was a home. Elijah halted the mule, unhitched it with practiced hands, and led it toward a lean-to stable. Then he motioned toward the cabin door. "Go on in." Abigail hesitated. The heavy wooden door creaked when she pushed it open. Inside was a single large room lit by the glow of a hearth. A table, scarred but solid, sat beneath the window. A shelf, lined with jars of beans and dried herbs, stretched along one wall. In one corner, tools leaned in neat order. Against the far wall stood a narrow bed, and a ladder led to a loft above. "You'll take the loft," Elijah said simply. "It's warmer up there, more private." Her throat tightened at the unexpected thoughtfulness. She climbed the ladder cautiously, her fingers brushing the rough wood. A straw mattress lay beneath thick quilts, patched but clean. She lowered herself onto it and let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It was more than she had dared hope for. Life in the cabin began with quiet, awkward rhythm. At dawn, Elijah split wood while Abigail swept the floor with a broom of bundled twigs. He showed her how to carry water from the spring, how to stack logs so they dried properly. She learned to scatter grain for the chickens and milk the goat, her hands clumsy at first. Elijah never mocked her missteps. He would only correct her grip or demonstrate once more, then leave her to master it herself. Meals were plain, beans, bread, venison, but eaten without the sting of shame. He never commented on how much she ate, never sneered the way others had. Once, when she burned the bread, she braced for harsh words. Instead, Elijah scraped away the blackened crust and said, "Try again tomorrow." Evenings were the hardest, filled with silence broken only by the crackle of fire. Abigail often read from the few books she found on the shelf, a weathered Bible, a geography with torn pages, a book of frontier tales. Her voice, hesitant at first, grew steadier as she read aloud. Sometimes she thought Elijah wasn't listening, but then he would ask a question that proved he had heard every word. The first true crack in his reserve came during a storm. Wind shrieked down the chimney, rattling the shutters. One of the goats, panicked, broke free and bolted into the night. Elijah caught it and hauled it back, dripping with sleet. Abigail rushed forward, wrapping the trembling creature in quilts near the fire. She rubbed its sides until it quieted. When she looked up, Elijah was watching her. His mouth twitched, almost a smile, though quickly gone. Still, the firelight caught something softer in his eyes, and Abigail's chest warmed. As the days stretched into weeks, she began to hum old Amish hymns while she worked, melodies she hadn't sung since leaving Pennsylvania. At first, the sound felt out of place, but gradually it filled the silence with life. Elijah never told her to stop. One evening, as she mended his shirt by the hearth, she dared to ask, "Why live up here alone?" Elijah paused in sharpening his knife. Shadows flickered across his scarred face. "Because people take what they want," he said quietly, "and they never stop taking." His words settled like stones in her heart. She did not press, but she understood. Pain had driven him into solitude, just as shame had driven her here. And yet, in the small rituals of cabin life, splitting wood, sharing meals, reading by lamplight, they were building something neither of them had known before. Not just survival, but a fragile sense of belonging. Lying in the loft one night, Abigail pulled the quilt close and whispered into the darkness, "Perhaps I was not too big. Perhaps I was just meant for a different place." Below, Elijah shifted in his chair. He said nothing, but the silence between them no longer felt empty. It felt like an answer. Winter crept down from the peaks, laying frost across the meadow and sealing the creek in glassy ice. Abigail had grown stronger with the work, hauling water, chopping kindling, even carrying sacks of grain that once would have left her gasping. Her body, long mocked as clumsy and too large, was now her strength. But just as she began to trust her new life, a shadow from her past arrived in the form of a letter. It came one morning when Elijah returned from a supply trip to Gunnison. He handed her a folded envelope with Philadelphia ink scrawled across the front. Abigail's hands shook as she opened it. The words inside clawed at her chest. Her late husband's creditors had not forgotten her. They demanded payment for debts he left behind, threatening that if she could not settle, they would have her bound into labor at a mining camp. The letter carried the cold authority of the city, unbending, merciless. Abigail's vision blurred. She had not told Elijah everything when she came. She had hidden this truth, ashamed and afraid. Now, that silence had come to collect its price. That night, as snow tapped against the shutters, she tried to slip away. She packed her satchel with trembling hands, meaning to leave the cabin quietly so Elijah would not be burdened. But when she opened the door, the storm's fury nearly drove her back. And then Elijah's voice came from the dark. "Where are you going?" She froze. He stepped into the lantern light, his hair damp with snow, his eyes steady. "I won't let my shame ruin you," she whispered. "If they come, they'll drag me away. I won't put that on you." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he reached forward, pulling the satchel from her grip, setting it firmly aside. "You think you carry this alone? No. Your burden's mine now, same as this cabin, same as the work we do each day. Don't ever run from me again." His words, rough but resolute, pierced deeper than any kindness she had known. For the first time, she felt the weight of her fear lighten. But the storm outside was not only of snow. Word traveled fast in small towns, and whispers of her debt soon reached Gunnison. Some scoffed at Eli for taking in a woman tainted by scandal. Others muttered that she would bring ruin to his name. One Sunday, in the small clapboard church, Abigail felt the eyes of the whole congregation pressing down on her. Shame threatened to drown her, but before she could crumble, Elijah rose. He stood tall, scarred face turned to the crowd. "I love this woman," he said, voice ringing through the rafters, "and I will marry her here before you all. Any debt she carries, I carry. Any judgment you throw at me." Gasps swept the pews. The preacher faltered mid-sermon, yet no one dared answer him. Elijah's declaration was both vow and challenge. That night, back in the cabin, Abigail wept into her hands, not from shame, but from something new, hope fierce enough to burn against the cold. Still, the letter's threat loomed. The debt was real. The law could not be ignored. And as winter deepened, Abigail and Elijah both knew the past had not finished with them yet. The new year came with heavy snows, burying the trail to town and trapping the cabin in silence. Abigail tried to push away her fear by keeping busy, baking bread, mending clothes, feeding the livestock. But each night, when the fire burned low, she remembered the letter's threats. Then, one icy morning, the quiet shattered. A rider appeared on the ridge, cloak snapping in the wind. Behind him came two more, their horses blowing steam. Abigail's heart seized when she recognized the insignia on their coats, agents of the creditors. They had come to collect. Elijah stepped outside, rifle in hand, his frame towering against the white drifts. Abigail rushed after him, the cold biting her cheeks. "Mr. Stone," the lead rider called, "we've business with the woman, debts unpaid, she comes with us." Abigail's knees weakened, but Elijah's stance never wavered. "She stays," he said simply. The second rider sneered. "You'd defy the law for her? Risk your land, your life?" Elijah's scarred face hardened. "I've risked both before. This woman is my betrothed. Her life is bound to mine. If you want her, you'll have to claim her from me and from this mountain." The men shifted uneasily. The storm of his voice was matched by the sight behind him. Abigail standing straight despite her fear, musket clutched in her hands. Her Amish dress whipped in the wind, but her eyes blazed with a strength the townsfolk had never seen. "I will not go back," she declared. "My past is paid in full. You cannot own me." The lead rider scowled, but the weight of their defiance, his rifle, her voice, made him hesitate. Finally, with a curse, he yanked his reins. "This isn't over," he spat before wheeling his horse and thundering back down the ridge. The others followed, leaving only churned snow and silence. Abigail's breath burst from her in a cloud, her hands trembling now that it was done. Elijah lowered his rifle, his eyes meeting hers. "You spoke for yourself," he murmured, strong as any vow. She swallowed hard, tears stinging. "I wasn't alone. I'll never be alone again." In that moment, as the storm clouds broke and sunlight struck the snow, she knew the creditors might return, that whispers might rise again. But together they had claimed something greater than law or debt could touch, the right to stand, side by side, unbroken. That night, the cabin glowed like a lantern in the white silence of the mountains. Abigail sat near the hearth, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug, the musket resting within reach against the wall. The events of the day still trembled inside her, but with each crackle of the fire her breath steadied. Elijah returned from the barn, snow dusting his shoulders. He set the rifle on its hooks and lowered himself into the chair opposite her. For a time they sat without speaking, only the wind moaning beyond the shutters. Then he leaned forward, his scarred hands folded. "You were fearless today," he said softly. Abigail shook her head. "I was terrified, but I could not let them take me. Not after everything we've built here." His gaze held hers, steady as stone. "Then this place isn't just mine anymore. It's ours." Her throat tightened. She looked around. The quilts she had stitched, the bread rising by the stove, the shelves ordered by her own hands. It was true. This cabin, once a stranger's refuge, had become her home. The storm outside swelled, snow pelting the roof. Yet inside, warmth wrapped around them, not just from the fire, but from something larger. The knowledge that they had chosen each other against debt, against ridicule, against fear. Abigail whispered half to herself, "Maybe I really am perfect here." Elijah's mouth curved, almost a smile. "Not maybe. You are." The firelight flickered across their faces, and for the first time, Abigail felt the weight of her past fall away. What lay ahead, more creditors, more trials, was uncertain. But tonight, in the shelter of the mountains and the strength of the man beside her, she belonged. Every time I see your comments, I'm reminded that stories like Abigail and Elijah's are not only about the frontier, but about all of us, about finding a place where we are accepted as we are. If you've ever felt too different, too overlooked, know this: you are not a burden, and your worth cannot be measured by anyone's scorn. Tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Share your voice below. And if you still believe love and courage can take root even in the harshest winters, stay with us. The next story is waiting just around the bend.